The rain hit the windows of the Seattle diner late at night. Nash just wanted a quiet meal with his new German Shepherd puppy. But when the tired waitress brought their food, she stopped moving. She stared at the puppy in pure terror. The neon sign above them revealed a glowing blue stain on the dog's right paw. The heavy tray fell from her hands and shattered on the floor. Her mother died 2 weeks ago, and her hand had that exact same glowing mark. Across the room, 2 men in dark coats slowly stood up. They reached for hidden weapons. Nash knew his peaceful night was over. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments which country you are watching from. And if you love stories that melt your heart, please subscribe to support our channel. Rain battered Seattle. It lashed against the greasy windows of the Harbor Point Diner and distorted the neon open sign into a red blur. Nash pushed through the heavy glass door and brought a gust of cold, salty air with him. He was a tall man, built like a fortress, moving with the quiet and deliberate grace of a Navy SEAL on active duty. Water dripped from his dark canvas jacket. Tucked securely inside the unzipped front of his coat was a ball of black and tan fur, Apollo. The German Shepherd puppy poked his head out. His oversized ears flopped as he took in the bright lights and the smell of fried bacon. Nash scanned the room. He did it out of pure habit. 2 exits, 7 customers. 3 of them looked like dock workers finishing a late shift. 2 men sat in a dark corner booth. They drank coffee, but did not eat. They wore heavy coats and kept their eyes low. Nash registered them as a potential anomaly, filed the information away, and walked to a booth near the back. He chose a seat facing the front door. He set Apollo down on the vinyl bench beside him. The puppy immediately curled into a tight circle, exhausted from the long trip. Across the room, Audrey wiped down the counter with methodical, robotic movements. She was 22 years old, but the last few weeks had aged her greatly. Her blonde hair was tied back in a messy knot. Dark shadows hung under her eyes. She wore a faded pink uniform that smelled of old grease and cheap bleach. Audrey operated on pure autopilot. Ever since the police called her about the car crash, she felt absolutely nothing. Her mother, Dr. Evelyn Vance, was a brilliant biologist. The authorities said she lost control of her car on the wet highway. Audrey knew her mother was a highly cautious driver, but the police closed the case anyway. Audrey just needed the tips to pay for the funeral costs. She picked up a menu and a notepad, forcing herself to walk toward the new customer. Audrey stopped at the table. Nash looked up. His dark eyes were sharp, evaluating her in a fraction of a second. "Coffee," Nash said. His voice was low and calm. "Black, and a plate of scrambled eggs for the dog. No salt." Audrey blinked. She looked past him to the puppy. Apollo lifted his head and let out a soft whine. A tiny crack appeared in Audrey's numb exterior. The puppy looked innocent and entirely out of place in this gritty port diner. "Coming right up," Audrey muttered. She turned and walked back to the kitchen. Nash watched her go. He noticed the slight tremble in her hands. He noticed how she kept her head down. But he did not pry. He was on leave. He wanted a hot meal and a warm bed for his dog. He reached out and scratched Apollo behind the ears. The dog leaned into his hand. 10 minutes later, Audrey emerged from the kitchen holding a large plastic tray. She balanced a heavy ceramic mug of black coffee, a plate of eggs, and a tall glass of ice water. She navigated the narrow aisles of the diner. The 2 men in the dark corner booth watched her intently. Nash noticed their unblinking gaze. His muscles tightened slightly. He shifted his weight and prepared for any sudden movement. Audrey reached the booth. She set the coffee down first. Then she reached for the plate of eggs. Apollo smelled the food. The puppy scrambled forward on the vinyl seat, excited. He placed his front paws on the edge of the table. The diner had cheap, flickering fluorescent lights overhead. However, a small neon beer sign cast a harsh glow directly onto the table. When Apollo raised his right paw, the light caught the bottom of his paw pad. It was not mud. It was not dirt. It was a thick, luminescent blue substance. It glowed faintly with an unnatural, toxic shade of blue. Audrey looked down, her eyes locked onto the glowing blue stain on the puppy's paw. Time stopped. All the air left Audrey's lungs. Her fingers went completely numb. The heavy plastic tray slipped from her grasp. The tray hit the floor with a deafening crash. The glass of ice water shattered. Ice cubes and water exploded across the linoleum. The ceramic plate broke in half and sent scrambled eggs flying across the floor. Nash did not flinch. He stayed perfectly still. His eyes darted immediately to the two men in the corner booth. The men sat up straight. Their hands moved beneath their coats. Nash knew that body language. They were reaching for weapons. Audrey dropped to her knees amidst the broken glass. She did not care about the mess. She did not care about the angry shout from the cook in the back. She stared at the puppy. Apollo whined, frightened by the loud noise, and retreated quickly behind Nash. Audrey raised her trembling hands and gripped the edge of the table. Her face turned completely white. She looked up at Nash. Her eyes were wide with absolute raw terror. "Where?" Audrey gasped, her voice choking in her throat. "Where did he step in that?" Nash frowned. He looked down at the dog. He had led Apollo out near the old shipping containers down by the docks an hour ago. "Down by Pier 4, Nash answered. He kept his voice steady to ground her. "It is just some glowing chemical. I tried to wipe it off." Audrey shook her head violently. Tears welled up in her eyes and spilled over her pale cheeks. "It is not just a chemical," she whispered, her voice shaking violently. "My mother, at the morgue, when I went to identify her body." Audrey took a ragged breath. She looked back at the glowing blue spot on the vinyl seat where Apollo had rested his paw. "The police told me it was a car crash," Audrey cried, ignoring the ice water soaking into her knees. "They told me her car caught fire, but her right hand was covered in that exact same glowing blue dust. It was burned deeply into her skin." Nash felt a cold shift in the atmosphere of the diner. The pieces clicked together in his mind with lethal precision. A dead biologist, a strange, glowing chemical, and two men in heavy coats who were now sliding out of their booth, drawing silenced pistols from their waistbands. The blue stain was not an accident. It was a marker. And Audrey had just announced to the entire room that she knew it existed. "Get down," Nash commanded. Audrey did not process the command immediately. Her mind remained trapped in the morgue, replaying the image of her mother's burned hand. The cold linoleum soaked her knees. The broken glass bit into her skin. Nash did not wait for her to understand. He lunged across the space between them. His large hand grabbed the collar of her pink uniform. He yanked her downward with brutal force. Audrey hit the floor hard. The breath left her lungs in a sharp gasp. A split second later, a soft, mechanical pop echoed through the diner. It sounded like a nail gun. A hole appeared in the vinyl back of the booth exactly where Audrey had been standing. Stuffing exploded outward. "Stay down and cover the dog," Nash ordered. His voice lacked any trace of panic. It was cold and calculating. Audrey scrambled backward on her hands and knees. She grabbed Apollo. The German Shepherd puppy whimpered and buried his face in her arms. She curled her body over him, pressing her back against the metal base of the counter. Nash moved with explosive speed. He kicked the heavy metal base of their table. The bolts ripped free from the floorboards. He grabbed the edge of the tabletop and flipped it upward. The thick wood and metal structure became a makeshift barricade. Two more suppressed shots hit the underside of the table. Wood splintered. Nash dropped into a crouch behind the barricade. He quickly assessed the threat. Two shooters. Both wore heavy coats to conceal their weapons. The first man was tall with a jagged scar running down his jaw. The second man was stocky, moving heavily but with trained purpose. They were not common thugs. They moved in a coordinated formation, flanking the booth to trap Nash and Audrey. The tall man stepped out of the booth first. He raised a black pistol equipped with a silencer. He aimed carefully at the overturned table. Nash reached out and grabbed the full pot of boiling coffee left on the counter by another waitress. He calculated the distance and the angle. He did not hesitate. He stood up slightly, exposing his shoulder, and hurled the glass pot like a grenade. The coffee pot struck the tall man squarely in the chest. It shattered on impact. Boiling liquid soaked through his clothes and scalded his neck. The man screamed. His finger jerked on the trigger. His gun fired wildly, sending a bullet into the ceiling tiles. Dust and plaster rained down on the patrons. Chaos erupted in the diner. Customers screamed and scrambled for the front exit. The cook yelled from the kitchen window, then ducked out of sight. Nash used the distraction. He vaulted over the overturned table. He closed the distance between himself and the tall man before the shooter could recover. Nash grabbed the man's gun hand. He twisted the wrist sharply outward. A loud crack cut through the screams. The tall man dropped the weapon. Nash delivered a devastating knee strike to the man's ribs, sending him crashing into a nearby booth. The man went limp. The stocky man realized his partner was down. He abandoned his stealth approach. He raised his weapon and fired 3 rapid shots at Nash. Nash dove sideways. He hit the floor and rolled behind the diner's front counter. Bullets shattered the glass display case above his head. Stale pies and cakes exploded into a cloud of crumbs and frosting. Glass shards rained down on Nash's back. Audrey screamed from her hiding spot. She squeezed her eyes shut. She held Apollo so tightly the dog whined in protest. She expected to feel a bullet tear through her flesh at any moment. Nash checked his position. He was unarmed. The stocky shooter was advancing slowly toward the counter. Nash could hear the heavy boots crushing broken glass on the floor. The man was reloading his weapon. The metallic click of a fresh magazine sliding into place gave Nash a 1-second window. Nash pushed himself up from the floor. He grabbed a heavy metal napkin dispenser from the counter. He threw it hard at the neon beer sign hanging directly above the stocky man. The metal dispenser smashed into the glass tubes. The sign exploded in a shower of sparks and electrical pops. The sudden darkness and flying glass blinded the shooter for a fraction of a second. Nash launched himself over the counter. He tackled the stocky man around the waist. The sheer force of the impact drove the breath from the shooter's lungs. They crashed onto the floor in a tangle of limbs. The man struggled, trying to bring his gun up. Nash pinned the man's arm to the floor with his knee. He delivered 2 quick, precise punches to the man's jaw. The shooter's eyes rolled back, and his head hit the linoleum with a dull thud. He did not move again. Silence fell over the diner, broken only by the buzzing of a broken electrical wire and the harsh breathing of the remaining patrons. Nash stood up. He wiped a streak of blood from his cheek. A piece of flying glass had grazed him. He looked down at the 2 unconscious men. He quickly patted down their coats. He found spare magazines and a set of car keys. He took both. He turned and walked back to the kitchen counter. Audrey was still curled in a ball on the floor. She trembled violently. Apollo licked the tears streaming down her face. Nash crouched down beside her. He reached out and gently touched her shoulder. Audrey flinched, letting out a small, terrified gasp. "They are down," Nash said softly. "You are safe for now." Audrey opened her eyes. She looked at Nash. He stood tall and unbothered by the violence that had just occurred. He looked like a guardian pulled straight out of a war zone. "Who are they?" Audrey whispered. Her teeth chattered. "I do not know," Nash replied. "But they are professionals, and they will have backup. We cannot stay here." Nash stood up and offered her his hand. Audrey looked at his outstretched fingers. She slowly reached out and took his hand. His grip was firm and warm. He pulled her up to her feet. "Grab the dog," Nash instructed. "We are leaving." Audrey scooped Apollo into her arms. The puppy buried his nose into her neck. She looked around the destroyed diner. The life she knew was entirely shattered, much like the glass covering the floor. She followed Nash toward the back exit, stepping into the cold Seattle rain. Nash pushed the heavy metal door open. The alleyway was dark and smelled of rotting garbage. The rain instantly soaked Audrey's uniform. She shivered, holding the puppy tighter. Nash scanned the shadows. his eyes adjusting quickly to the darkness. He knew the police would arrive in less than 3 minutes. The sirens were already wailing in the distance, cutting through the sound of the storm. "Stay close," Nash told her, his voice barely audible over the rain. He led the way down the narrow alley. Audrey followed, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She trusted this stranger completely because she had absolutely no other choice. Nash did not pause to check the weather. He moved with calculated urgency. His eyes scanned the shadows and the fire escapes above. He held a set of car keys in his right hand. He had stripped them from the stocky shooter inside the diner. He pressed the unlock button. A block down the alley, the headlights of a black SUV flashed twice. The vehicle sat idling quietly near a row of overflowing dumpsters. "Move," Nash instructed. His voice cut clearly through the sound of the rain. "Keep your head down and stay directly behind me." Audrey nodded. She could not speak. Her teeth chattered too loudly. She forced her legs to move, stepping over puddles and discarded trash. The adrenaline from the diner shootout began to fade. A deep, bone-chilling fear threatened to take its place. She looked at the broad back of the stranger leading her. He moved silently, his boots making no splashing sounds. He was a professional. He was her only chance of surviving the night. They reached the SUV. Nash opened the rear door. "Get in. Keep the dog low," he ordered. Audrey scrambled into the back seat. She huddled on the dark leather upholstery. Nash slid into the driver's seat. He started the engine. It roared to life with a powerful, suppressed hum. He shifted the gear into drive and steered the heavy vehicle out of the alley. He did not turn on the headlights immediately. He navigated the first 2 blocks using only the ambient light from the street lamps. Once they merged onto a larger arterial road, Nash flicked the headlights on. The windshield wipers beat a steady, frantic rhythm against the glass. "Are you hurt?" Nash asked. He checked the rearview mirror constantly. "No," Audrey whispered. She stroked Apollo's wet fur. The dog was trembling just as much as she was, just cold and terrified. "Who are you?" "My name is Nash. I am active duty military. Navy SEAL," he spoke plainly, stating facts rather than bragging. "I stopped for coffee. I did not expect a hit squad." Audrey let out a shaky breath. "They wanted to kill me because I saw the blue stain on Apollo." Nash took a sharp left turn, heading toward the industrial district. He wanted to avoid the main highways. "Tell me about that stain. Tell me about your mother." Audrey closed her eyes. The image of the morgue flashed in her mind again. She pushed it away and focused on the facts. Her name was Evelyn. She was an environmental biologist. She contracted with the city of Seattle. Her job was to test the water quality around the major shipping ports. She checked for chemical runoff, illegal dumping, things like that. 2 weeks ago, she started acting strange, paranoid. She told me she found a massive discrepancy in the water samples near Pier 4. Nash listened intently. His eyes remained fixed on the road, but his mind processed every word. Pier 4. That was exactly where he had let Apollo out to relieve himself earlier tonight. She said the readings were off the charts. Audrey continued. Her voice gained a little more strength. She was planning to take her findings to the federal authorities, but she never made it. The police said her brakes failed on the highway. Her car hit a barrier and caught fire. But when I saw her body, her right hand had that glowing blue residue baked into the skin. She must have touched something at the port right before they killed her. "It is a marker," Nash said. "Smugglers use rare, luminescent chemicals to tag high-value containers. It is invisible during the day. It only shows up under specific lighting or in pure darkness. Your mother stumbled onto a major illegal shipment, and my dog stepped in the residue. Suddenly, bright high beams flooded the interior of their SUV. Nash checked the mirror. A dark sedan had pulled up fast behind them. It did not have police lights. It matched their speed perfectly. "Hold on," Nash ordered. He slammed his foot on the gas pedal. The heavy SUV surged forward. The engine growled loudly. Nash gripped the steering wheel with both hands. The wet roads were slick with oil and rain. The sedan accelerated, staying right on their bumper. A window rolled down on the passenger side of the pursuing car. A man leaned out holding a submachine gun. Muzzle flashes lit up the dark street. Bullets struck the rear door of the SUV. The heavy armor plating absorbed the impact with loud, metallic thuds. Nash realized he had stolen a vehicle belonging to the hit squad. It was heavily modified. "Get down on the floorboard," Nash shouted. Audrey slid off the seat, curling herself tightly around Apollo on the floor. Nash swerved violently to the right. He took a corner at 60 miles per hour. The tires screamed against the wet asphalt. The heavy SUV fishtailed, but Nash expertly countersteered, regaining traction instantly. The sedan followed, taking the corner wider but maintaining speed. Nash navigated the tight, winding streets of the warehouse district. He needed to end this quickly before the shooters got lucky and hit a tire. He scanned the upcoming blocks. He spotted an old scrapyard at the end of a long, narrow street. It was a dead end. Massive piles of crushed cars and rusted metal beams blocked the path. It was a trap, but Nash intended to use it to his advantage. He floored the accelerator, driving straight toward the dead end. The sedan stayed right behind him, the driver thinking Nash had made a fatal mistake. The piles of twisted metal loomed closer. 100 yards, 50 yards. Nash did not brake. He waited for the absolute last fraction of a second. "Brace yourselves," Nash roared. Nash yanked the emergency brake and spun the steering wheel hard to the left. The heavy SUV went into a massive, uncontrolled slide on the slick pavement. It rotated a full 180 degrees. The vehicle slid backward, stopping mere inches from a towering pile of rusted steel beams. The driver of the sedan panicked. He saw the black SUV suddenly block his path facing backward. He slammed on his brakes, but it was too late. The sedan was moving too fast on the wet road. The tires locked up. The car hydroplaned completely out of control. Nash threw his SUV into drive and stomped on the gas, moving out of the way just in time. The dark sedan flew past them. It slammed head-on into the solid wall of crushed scrap metal. The impact was deafening. The front end of the sedan crumpled like an aluminum can. The windshield shattered outward. The horn began to blare in a continuous, high-pitched wail. Smoke billowed from the destroyed engine block. Nobody got out of the sedan. Nash stopped his vehicle a safe distance away. He watched the wreckage for 10 seconds. There was no movement. He let out a slow, controlled breath. He looked over his shoulder. Audrey was trembling on the floorboard, clutching the dog. "It is over," Nash said softly. "They are not following us anymore." He shifted the car back into gear and drove out of the scrapyard, disappearing back into the stormy Seattle night. They needed a place to hide, and they needed answers. Nash navigated the battered SUV to the outskirts of the city. He bypassed the bright neon signs of active motels and drove down a forgotten county road. He finally pulled into the parking lot of an abandoned motor lodge. Tall weeds grew through the cracked asphalt. The roof of the main office sagged heavily under the weight of the endless rain. It was a forgotten place. For Nash, it was the perfect temporary shelter. He parked the vehicle behind a large rusted dumpster to hide it from the main road. He killed the engine. The sudden silence inside the cabin felt heavy, broken only by the steady drum of rain against the roof. "We will stay here for a little while," Nash said. He unbuckled his seatbelt. "We need to plan our next move out of sight." Audrey nodded slowly. Her teeth still chattered from the cold and the residual shock of the shootout. She clutched Apollo tightly to her chest. Nash stepped out into the storm and checked the perimeter of the motel. He moved like a shadow, his eyes scanning the dark tree line and the empty road. Once he secured the area, he kicked open the swollen wooden door of room number 7. The interior smelled of mildew, dust, and old cigarettes. The furniture consisted of a bare mattress and a broken chair. He signaled for Audrey to come inside. She hurried through the rain and stepped into the dark room. Nash closed the door and locked the deadbolt. He pulled a heavy curtain over the only window, blocking out any view from the outside. "Sit on the bed," Nash instructed. He walked into the small bathroom and rummaged through the cabinets. He found a surprisingly clean, albeit faded, towel. He brought it back into the main room. He did not hand it to Audrey first. Instead, he knelt on the dusty floor next to the puppy. "Let me see him," Nash said softly. Audrey gently placed Apollo on the floor. Nash took the towel and began to dry the dog. His large, calloused hands moved with surprising gentleness. He rubbed the rainwater from the puppy's dark fur, speaking in low, calming tones. Apollo leaned into the touch, his tail giving a weak wag. Nash lifted the puppy's right paw. He inspected the pads. The glowing blue substance was still there, though slightly faded from the wet pavement. Nash frowned. The chemical was highly resilient. Audrey watched him from the edge of the bare mattress. She wrapped her arms around her knees. The image of the lethal soldier shattering a man's arm in the diner clashed violently with the image of the man kneeling on the floor to dry a stray puppy. "You move like you have done this before," Audrey whispered. "I have been in bad situations," Nash replied. He finished drying Apollo and handed the damp towel to Audrey. "Dry your hair. You need to stay warm to keep your mind sharp." Audrey took the towel. "They are not going to stop hunting us, are they?" "No," Nash stated plainly. He sat on the broken chair facing the door. "Your mother found something massive. The men who attacked us were heavily funded. They cleaned up the crash site. They faked a police report. They want all loose ends tied up. That includes you." Audrey buried her face in her hands. "I do not even know what she found. She never brought her work home. She kept everything at her apartment." Nash looked up. His dark eyes locked onto her face. "Has anyone been to her apartment since she died?" "The police?" Audrey answered. "They taped it off. They told me I could not go inside until the investigation was officially closed. I have the key, but the landlord said no one is allowed in." Nash stood up. A new plan formed in his mind. "The hit squad attacked you because you recognized the chemical marker. That means they do not know if your mother told you anything else. It also means they might not have found her research notes. If she hid them in the apartment, we need to get there before they burn the place down." Audrey looked terrified. "Go back into the city? They will be looking for us." "They will look for us on the roads and at the bus stations," Nash said. He checked the magazine of his stolen pistol. "They will not expect us to walk straight back into the center of the mess. We are going to that apartment." 2 hours later, they drove back into the heart of Seattle. The rain provided a thick layer of cover. Nash parked 3 blocks away from Evelyn's apartment building. It was a modest brick structure in a quiet residential neighborhood. They walked through the dark alleys to avoid the street cameras. Audrey led the way to the back entrance. Nash bypassed the locked security door in less than 10 seconds, using a small tool from his pocket. They climbed the dark stairwell to the 3rd floor. Audrey stopped in front of door number 3, B. A strip of yellow police tape stretched across the frame. Nash peeled the tape back carefully. He used Audrey's key to unlock the deadbolt and pushed the door open. He stepped inside first, sweeping the room with his pistol drawn. The apartment was empty, but it was completely destroyed. Audrey gasped as she walked in. The couch cushions were sliced open. Books were ripped from the shelves and thrown across the living room. The drywall in the hallway had huge holes smashed into it. Whoever ordered the hit on her mother had also ordered a frantic search of this home. "They already tore it apart," Audrey whispered. Tears threatened to spill again. "There is nothing left. They tore it apart, which means they did not find what they were looking for right away," Nash observed. He lowered his weapon. "Start looking. Think like your mother. Where would she hide something small and incredibly important?" Audrey moved through the wreckage of her childhood home. She checked the kitchen cabinets, the false bottoms of drawers, and the back of the closet. She found nothing. Despair began to settle heavily on her shoulders. Meanwhile, Apollo trotted through the debris. The puppy sniffed the torn books and the broken glass. Suddenly, The dog stopped near the corner of the small study. He let out a sharp whine. Nash looked over. Apollo began to scratch frantically at the wooden baseboard near a heavy oak bookshelf. The dog whimpered, digging his small claws into the gap between the wall and the floor. Nash walked over and knelt beside the dog. He inspected the wooden planks. One of the floorboards looked perfectly normal, but the nail heads were slightly less rusted than the others. Nash pulled a combat knife from his belt. He wedged the thick blade into the seam and pried upward. With a sharp crack, the short floorboard popped loose. Nash reached into the dark cavity beneath the floor. His fingers brushed against a cold, stiff object. He pulled it out. It was a small, thick notebook tightly wrapped in several layers of clear plastic. Nash held it up. In the dim light filtering through the window, the edges of the plastic wrapper glowed faintly. It was covered in a fine layer of the same bright blue dust that stained Apollo's paw. "She hid it," Nash said, looking at Audrey. "And we just found it." Nash and Audrey returned to the abandoned motor lodge. The rain still pounded the sagging roof of the forgotten building. Nash secured the heavy wooden door of room number 7. He placed the plastic-wrapped notebook on the dusty mattress. Audrey sat beside it. She stared at the faint blue glow illuminating the edges of the plastic wrapper. Nash pulled his encrypted phone from his jacket pocket. He carefully unwrapped the notebook. The pages were filled with Evelyn's neat, precise handwriting. Columns of numbers, dates, and complex chemical formulas covered the paper. "I cannot read this," Nash said, "but I know someone who can." He took pictures of the pages using his phone. He sent the encrypted files to Marcus. Marcus was a former Navy intelligence officer. He operated out of a secure basement in Virginia and owed Nash his life from a past deployment. Marcus rarely asked questions. He possessed a brilliant mind for decrypting raw data and only provided factual answers. Nash set the phone down on the mattress. "Now we wait. Do not touch the pages directly. We do not know how toxic that blue substance is." Audrey nodded. She looked closely at the exposed pages without touching them. She recognized her mother's shorthand immediately. Evelyn always kept meticulous, detailed records of her environmental tests. She took water samples near Pier 4. Audrey pointed to a date logged on the second page. She logged a massive spike in heavy metals here. But the next page shows something else entirely. She stopped tracking water quality. She started tracking specific cargo ships arriving at the port. Why would a biologist track cargo ships? Nash watched the dark screen of his phone. Because she realized the contamination did not come from an industrial factory. It came from the cargo itself. The blue chemical was leaking into the water. The phone buzzed against the mattress. A text message from Marcus appeared on the screen. Nash picked it up and opened the secure file. His jaw tightened as he read the brief, alarming report. "Marcus ran the chemical formula your mother wrote down," Nash said. His voice turned incredibly grim. "The glowing blue dust on my dog's paw is not industrial dye. It is not paint. It is a highly specialized radioactive isotope. It emits a very specific thermal frequency. You can only track it with military-grade thermal scanners." Audrey felt the blood drain completely from her face. She felt sick to her stomach. Radioactive? Why would someone put a radioactive isotope on shipping containers? "To mark them in the dark," Nash explained calmly. He swiped to the next page of Marcus's message. "Smugglers use this method to tag high-value, illegal cargo. It allows their extraction teams to find the right containers at night without turning on any lights. They avoid port security cameras. Your mother stumbled onto a massive black market operation. She found the exact marker they used to identify their shipments." Audrey grabbed the edges of the notebook. She flipped to the very last page. It did not contain chemical formulas or water test results. It contained a simple list of 12 alphanumeric codes. "These are shipping container tracking numbers," Audrey said. Her voice trembled slightly as she read the numbers aloud. She figured out exactly which boxes contained the illegal cargo. She had the proof. "They are smuggling weapons," Nash concluded, connecting the final dots. Heavy artillery, explosives. That is the only thing worth using a radioactive isotope for. And whoever is running this operation has enough money to hire professional hit squads to protect their secret. They killed her to keep these numbers hidden. Apollo suddenly sat up on the floor. The puppy let out a low, rumbling growl. He stared intensely at the locked motel door. His ears stood straight up. Nash stopped talking instantly. His military instincts flared to life. He heard a faint sound outside in the rain. It was the distinct crunch of gravel under tactical boots. The hit squad had tracked them to the motor lodge. They were surrounding the room. "Get down!" Nash hissed. Audrey dropped to the floor immediately, grabbing Apollo and pulling him close to her chest. Nash reached into the deep pockets of his canvas jacket. He pulled out a small, cylindrical object. It was a tactical smoke grenade he had taken from the stocky shooter at the diner. He kept his stolen pistol ready in his right hand. He moved silently toward the wall beside the door. A heavy steel battering ram smashed into the motel door. The old wood splintered violently. The deadbolt tore free from the doorframe. The door flew open, hitting the interior wall with a deafening crash. 3 men wearing black tactical gear stormed into the room. They carried assault rifles equipped with red laser sights. Nash pulled the pin on the grenade. He threw it directly at the doorway, right at the feet of the lead attacker. Thick, blinding white smoke erupted instantly. It expanded rapidly and filled the small room in less than 2 seconds. The red laser sights cut through the dense smoke blindly. The tactical team hesitated, coughing violently and unable to see their targets. "Window, now!" Nash shouted to Audrey. He grabbed the heavy wooden chair from the corner of the room. He hurled it with immense force through the glass window at the back of the room. The glass shattered outward into the rainy night. Rain and freezing wind poured inside. Nash hoisted Audrey up by her waist and pushed her through the broken frame. She tumbled out into the muddy grass behind the motel. He grabbed Apollo by the scruff, tucking the frightened dog securely under one arm. Nash vaulted through the shattered window just as a hail of bullets ripped through the thick smoke and completely shredded the mattress behind him. They hit the ground running hard. The violent storm swallowed them whole as they sprinted toward the dark tree line. They left the heavy gunfire and the burning motel room far behind them. Nash did not slow down. He navigated the dense woods using only his instincts and the faint moonlight filtering through the storm clouds. Audrey struggled to keep up, slipping on the wet leaves and deep mud. She pushed her burning leg muscles to their absolute limit. She knew stopping meant certain death. Nash finally halted near a rocky overhang deep in the forest. He set Apollo down gently. The puppy shook the cold rain from his fur. Nash checked his weapon. He had 6 rounds left. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of places to hide. But they had the container numbers. They had the target. Nash looked toward the distant city lights glowing through the trees. He made a decision. They would stop running. They would take the fight directly to the port. Nash guided Audrey through the dense forest until they reached an old logging road. They found a rusted pickup truck parked near a deserted maintenance shed. Nash hot-wired the engine in under a minute. They drove back toward the glowing skyline of Seattle. The rain continued to fall in heavy sheets, washing the mud from their clothes. Nash checked the weapons he had scavenged. During the chaos at the motel, he had snatched an assault rifle from the floor before diving through the window. He checked the magazine. 30 rounds. He handed his stolen pistol to Audrey. "Keep the safety on until you need to pull the trigger," Nash told her. Audrey took the heavy gun with trembling hands. She felt the cold steel against her palm. She had never held a weapon before. The reality of her situation settled heavily on her shoulders. She looked at Apollo resting on her lap. The puppy slept soundly, exhausted from the constant running. Audrey promised herself she would protect the dog, no matter what happened next. They arrived at the industrial district near Pier 4. The port was a massive labyrinth of steel and concrete. Towering cranes looked like mechanical monsters in the dark. Shipping containers sat stacked 5 stories high, creating long, canyon-like aisles. Security patrols drove around the perimeter in vehicles with flashing amber lights. The air smelled strongly of salt, diesel fuel, and rust. Nash parked the stolen truck in a dark alley, 2 blocks away from the main gate. They approached the towering chain-link fence on foot. Nash used his combat knife to cut a precise hole in the wire mesh. He slipped through first, scanning the immediate area. He motioned for Audrey to follow. Nash led the way into the maze of containers. Audrey followed closely behind him, carrying Apollo tightly against her chest. The puppy seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. He did not bark. He did not whimper. He kept his ears pinned back and his eyes wide open. Nash moved with absolute silence. His tactical boots made zero noise on the wet concrete. He timed their movements perfectly with the sweeping security spotlights and the distant rolls of thunder. They reached Section G of the shipyard. Nash found a narrow gap between 2 heavily rusted shipping containers. The space was completely hidden from the main access road and shielded from the harsh wind. "Stay here," Nash whispered. "Keep the dog close. Do not make a single sound. If I do not come back in 20 minutes, you run. You go straight to the nearest federal building and hand them that notebook." Audrey nodded slowly. She crouched in the dark, wet corner. She held the pistol tightly in her right hand and wrapped her left arm around Apollo. The dog sat beside her, perfectly still, his body radiating a small amount of warmth in the freezing night. Nash looked at them one last time before slipping away into the shadows. Nash moved out alone. He memorized the 12 alphanumeric codes from Evelyn's notebook. He navigated the grid of towering metal boxes with the precision of a predator. The rain masked his footsteps. The darkness of the port worked entirely in his favor. He reached the designated loading zone at the far end of the pier. He stopped and scanned the area. The ambient light was incredibly low, broken only by a few flickering overhead lamps. Nash looked closely at the bottom corners of the containers in row 42. He saw it instantly. A faint, unnatural blue glow emanated from the heavy locking mechanisms of 3 specific containers. It was the radioactive isotope. Evelyn had tracked the exact shipment. Nash climbed quickly up the side of the lowest container. He used a heavy set of bolt cutters he found on a nearby forklift to snap the thick metal security seal. He pulled the heavy steel door open just enough to slip his broad shoulders inside. The interior was pitch black and smelled of fresh grease. Nash pulled a small tactical penlight from his pocket and clicked it on. Wooden crates filled the massive container. Nash pried the lid off the nearest crate using his combat knife. He looked inside, and his jaw tightened immediately. Military-grade explosives. C4 blocks packed tightly in protective foam. He moved to the next crate and forced it open. Fully automatic assault rifles. Rocket-propelled grenades. Armor-piercing ammunition. This was not a small smuggling ring moving stolen goods. This was a massive arms deal meant to equip a private army. Someone was moving heavy artillery through a civilian port under the cover of night. Nash realized the scale of the threat. Evelyn had uncovered a domestic terror operation or a cartel supply line. Suddenly, Nash heard the low hum of heavy engines approaching from the north side of the pier. He quickly shut off his penlight. He slipped out of the container and pushed the heavy metal door shut. He climbed swiftly to the top of the container and lay completely flat against the cold, wet metal roof. Down below, the main access road lit up brightly. 5 black SUVs drove in a tight, disciplined convoy. They stopped directly in front of row 42. The headlights cut fiercely through the heavy rain, illuminating the exact containers Nash had just searched. Armed men stepped out of the vehicles simultaneously. They wore dark tactical gear and carried suppressed submachine guns. They formed a tight defensive perimeter around the vehicles, their eyes scanning the dark shipyard for any signs of movement. They were highly trained professionals, moving with strict military precision. Nash watched them from above, the cold rain soaking through his jacket. His finger rested lightly on the trigger of his scavenged rifle. He slowed his breathing and calculated the angles. The buyers had arrived, and the real fight was about to begin. Nash lay completely flat against the freezing metal roof of the shipping container. Down below, the 5 black SUVs formed a tight defensive perimeter. Men dressed in dark tactical gear moved with practiced efficiency around the vehicles. Nash knew the ground level would soon be swarmed by heavily armed guards securing the perimeter. He needed an extra set of hands to record the evidence while he kept his scavenged rifle ready for any sudden threats. He slid backward toward the edge of the container and climbed down into the narrow, dark gap where he had left Audrey. Audrey huddled in the dark corner between the rusted steel walls. She held the heavy pistol tightly in her right hand. Apollo sat perfectly still beside her, his small body shivering slightly in the damp cold. Nash tapped her shoulder gently. She jumped, but did not make a single sound. "They are sweeping the ground level right now," Nash whispered closely into her ear. "We need to move up to a higher vantage point. Hand me the dog." Nash tucked the German Shepherd puppy securely under his left arm. He grabbed the rusted metal rungs of the container ladder and climbed upward with silent, fluid agility. He reached the top and lay flat on his stomach. Audrey followed immediately. She struggled with the slippery metal rungs, but she forced her burning muscles to work past the pain. She reached the roof and crawled over the sharp edge. The freezing rain soaked her pink uniform instantly, but the adrenaline pumping through her veins kept her moving. Nash pointed toward the brightly lit loading zone below. "Pull out your phone, hit record, hold it steady, and do not drop it." Audrey pulled her smartphone from her pocket. Her fingers felt numb from the icy wind, but she managed to open the camera application. She pressed the red record button. She rested her elbows on the edge of the container roof to stabilize the lens and get a clear view of the ground. Down below, the illegal transaction began. Workers opened the heavy steel doors of row 42. They used long metal crowbars to pry the wooden crates open. The harsh, bright headlights of the SUVs illuminated the military-grade explosives and the sleek black assault rifles packed inside. Audrey stared at the small digital screen of her phone. The sheer massive scale of the operation struck her with physical force. Her mother had died because of this exact cargo. Evelyn Vance was a brilliant scientist who cared deeply about protecting the environment. She had stumbled onto a highly illegal arms deal meant to equip a dangerous private army. Audrey felt a sudden, violent surge of pure anger. The overwhelming fear that had paralyzed her all night began to burn away completely. Hot tears mixed with the cold rain streaming down her cheeks. She tightened her grip on the small device. She wanted every single person down there to rot in a federal prison cell. The back door of the largest luxury SUV opened. A man stepped out into the pouring rain. He did not wear tactical gear like the others. He wore a sharp, tailored suit beneath a dark, expensive trench coat. 2 heavily armed guards flanked him immediately to provide cover. Nash zoomed in his vision, analyzing the target. The man walked with extreme confidence and authority. He approached the open wooden crates and inspected a block of C4 explosive. He nodded approvingly to the tactical leader standing nearby. "Keep the camera lens steady on his face," Nash ordered softly. Audrey adjusted the angle of her phone. The camera focused tightly on the man in the suit. The headlights caught his facial features perfectly. He turned slightly to speak to one of the guards, exposing his profile to the camera. Audrey stopped breathing. Her blood turned into ice water. She recognized the man instantly. She had seen his face on local television broadcasts for years. She had seen his picture printed in the daily newspaper. He was the man who had stood at a public podium just 2 weeks ago and promised to reduce violent crime in the city. "It is him," Audrey whispered. Her voice cracked with profound disbelief and horror. "Who?" Nash asked, keeping his rifle sight trained on the armed group below. "Chief Miller," Audrey gasped quietly. "The Seattle Chief of Police. He is the buyer." Nash absorbed the critical information instantly. The corruption ran straight to the absolute top of the local law enforcement chain. That fact explained how the hit squad operated with total impunity earlier tonight. That explained the entirely falsified police reports regarding Evelyn's fatal car crash. The chief of police was actively importing illegal military weapons right through his own city port. Down on the ground level, Chief Miller signaled to one of his personal men. A guard stepped forward, carrying a heavy, silver aluminum briefcase. He placed the briefcase on the hood of the SUV and popped the metal latches open. Neatly stacked bundles of $100 bills filled the interior to the brim. "Got it," Audrey said, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "The weapons, the money, and his exact face. We have the proof on video." "Send the video to the secure cloud network now," Nash commanded. "Do not wait a single second." Audrey tapped the screen quickly. The upload progress bar appeared on the display. The connection was slow due to the heavy storm, but the blue line started moving steadily across the screen. Suddenly, one of the tactical men standing near the SUVs raised a strange, bulky device to his eyes. It looked like a large, rectangular binocular set. Nash recognized the equipment immediately. It was a high-grade thermal imaging scanner. The smugglers used it to constantly check for rival gangs or hidden port security before finalizing the cash exchange. The guard swept the thermal scanner slowly across the top of the stacked shipping containers. Nash knew the freezing cold rain masked their human body heat effectively. Their soaking wet clothes cooled their skin surface temperature down significantly, blending them into the cold metal. But Apollo was entirely different. The German Shepherd puppy possessed a thick, dry undercoat that trapped a massive amount of core body heat. The small dog was a glowing, bright red beacon of warmth sitting on a freezing metal roof. The guard stopped sweeping the scanner abruptly. He locked the device directly onto their elevated position in row 42. "Sir?" the guard shouted loudly over the sound of the crashing rain. "Thermal contact, top of the containers, Sector 4. Chief Miller snapped his head upward. His eyes narrowed viciously as he stared into the dark rain. He did not hesitate for a moment. He pointed a gloved finger directly at the roof where Nash and Audrey lay hidden. "Light it up!" Miller roared. Nash reacted with blinding speed. "Get down!" He grabbed Audrey aggressively by the shoulder and pulled her violently backward just as the sky erupted with fire. 10 assault rifles fired completely simultaneously. The noise was absolutely deafening. It created a continuous mechanical roar that easily drowned out the thunder. Hundreds of high-velocity bullets slammed directly into the heavy steel walls of the shipping container beneath them. Bright orange sparks flew into the air like a localized, deadly firework display. Metal screamed and tore apart violently. The heavy impact shook the entire massive steel structure. Nash felt the metal roof vibrating under him. Bullets tore the air apart. The noise was deafening. He checked his scavenged rifle. 30 rounds. He needed a massive distraction to break the siege. He looked past the edge of the shipping container. A large auxiliary fuel tank sat near the heavy forklifts, directly behind the line of black SUVs. Nash tapped Audrey on the shoulder. "Stay completely flat," Nash ordered over the sound of gunfire. "When the explosion happens, cover your ears and do not look at the light." Audrey nodded. She pressed her face against the cold steel roof. She wrapped her body tightly around Apollo to shield the puppy. Nash pushed himself up into a crouching position. He ignored the bullets sparking against the metal around him. He leveled his rifle. He aimed precisely at the pressurized valve of the heavy fuel tank. He fired 3 rapid shots. The high-velocity rounds pierced the thick metal. Highly flammable diesel fuel sprayed into the air. Nash shifted his aim slightly. He fired 1 more round directly at a nearby electrical generator. The bullet struck the generator housing. A massive shower of bright sparks erupted. The sparks ignited the vaporized fuel instantly. A colossal fireball exploded into the dark sky. The shockwave rippled across the concrete port. The sheer force of the blast knocked several of the corrupt tactical guards completely off their feet. The intense heat washed over the top of the shipping containers. Audrey squeezed her eyes shut. She held her breath. She looked down at her phone screen. The upload progress bar vanished. The file transfer was complete. She quickly opened the browser and accessed the FBI emergency tip portal. She pasted the secure video link into the form. She typed a single sentence explaining the involvement of the Seattle Chief of Police. She hit the submit button. "It is sent," Audrey whispered into Apollo's fur. "We caught them." Down on the ground, chaos consumed the smugglers. The burning fuel illuminated the entire loading zone. Nash did not waste a single second. He slung the rifle over his back. He dropped over the back edge of the container, completely out of sight of the guards. He used a tall stack of wooden shipping pallets to break his fall. He landed silently on the wet concrete. The corrupt police officers were entirely disorganized. They shouted frantically, blinded by the sudden fire and smoke. Nash moved through the dark aisles like a ghost. He approached the closest guard from behind. Nash locked his arm firmly around the man's neck, cutting off the blood flow. He choked the guard out in 3 seconds and lowered the unconscious body quietly to the ground. Nash moved to the next target. 3 guards spotted him stepping out of the shadows. They raised their weapons. Nash grabbed a heavy metal wrench from a nearby toolbox. He threw it with lethal accuracy. The heavy tool struck the first guard squarely in the face, dropping him instantly. Nash closed the distance before the other 2 could pull their triggers. He grabbed the barrel of the second guard's weapon and forced it upward. He drove a brutal palm strike into the man's chin, snapping his head back. The third guard panicked and fired wildly. Nash ducked under the line of fire. He swept the man's legs out from under him. The guard crashed hard onto the concrete. Nash disarmed him and delivered a final, concussive strike to his temple. Chief Miller realized he was rapidly losing his men. Panic finally replaced his arrogance. He grabbed the heavy aluminum briefcase full of cash. He abandoned his team and ran toward the only undamaged SUV. Nash intercepted him. He stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, entirely blocking Miller's escape path. "Going somewhere?" Nash asked. His voice was cold and hollow. Miller dropped the heavy briefcase. He pulled a customized silver revolver from his shoulder holster. He aimed directly at Nash's chest. Nash did not flinch. He moved faster than Miller could process. Nash stepped inside the line of fire. He deflected the gun hand outward and twisted Miller's wrist viciously. The bone popped loudly. Miller screamed and dropped the revolver. Nash drove a devastating knee strike deep into Miller's stomach. The chief of police collapsed onto the wet ground. He gasped desperately for air, clutching his ruined wrist. Nash kicked the silver revolver far away. He pulled a thick plastic zip tie from his tactical vest. He bound Miller's hands tightly behind his back. "Your operation is over," Nash stated flatly. Suddenly, loud sirens cut sharply through the dying storm. Red and blue lights illuminated the dark shipyard. Heavy armored FBI vehicles smashed right through the main port gates. Dozens of federal agents swarmed the area, carrying riot shields and heavy weapons. The remaining corrupt cops dropped their guns instantly. They raised their hands in surrender, realizing they were completely surrounded. Nash left Miller on the ground. He climbed back up the rusted ladder of row 42. Audrey sat up slowly. Her pink uniform was torn and covered in soot. Her face was pale, but her eyes shone with absolute relief. She held Apollo tightly. Nash reached down. He offered her his hand. Audrey looked at his strong fingers. She smiled, took his hand, and let him pull her to her feet. "They are here," Nash said softly. "You did it. You stopped them." They climbed down the container together. FBI agents approached them immediately. Nash produced his military identification and explained the situation quickly. The agents secured the illegal weapons, collected the briefcase of cash, and dragged a cursing Chief Miller into the back of an armored transport van. The violent storm finally broke. The thick, dark clouds parted slowly. The morning sun began to rise over the Seattle skyline. It cast a warm, golden light over the cold steel of the port. Nash stood near the edge of the water. He watched the gentle waves lap against the concrete pier. Audrey walked up beside him. She held Apollo securely in her arms. The puppy seemed completely relaxed now. He licked Audrey's chin affectionately. Nash looked at Audrey. The heavy, cynical shadows were entirely gone from her eyes. She looked exhausted, but she looked truly alive for the first time since he met her in the diner. Nash reached out. He gently took her free hand in his. Her skin was warm. Audrey did not pull away. She squeezed his fingers gently, anchoring herself to the man who had saved her life. They turned their backs on the shipyard. They walked away from the flashing police lights and the broken metal, stepping out of the darkness and walking quietly into the bright, peaceful morning. Sometimes the darkest storms reveal the strongest light. Nash and Audrey proved that ordinary people, when pushed to the edge, can find extraordinary courage. They faced a towering system of corruption and chose not to run, but to stand their ground. From a simple act of compassion toward a rescued puppy, a massive web of deceit was completely unraveled. In my eyes, this story is a powerful reminder that justice often relies on the bravery of the few who are willing to fight for it. It shows that no matter how deep the shadows go, truth always finds a way to the surface. May God bless you and your family with unwavering strength, guiding you safely through any storms you might face. Please comment Amen below if you believe that light will always conquer the darkness. If Nash and Audrey's journey touched your heart, please share this video, leave a comment to let us know your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage and hope